Okay. So let's go back to our music library. We've got our header. It's looking not too bad. One thing I want to do, I want to customize it maybe just a little bit more. So the idea of using Bootstrap, well, there's a couple things we need to do with it. It's not full and complete. Number one, it's just given me this black background color. Maybe I don't want that. I'm going to use Bootstrap to create the navbar, but I'm going to need to brand it according to my client or the application I'm building. So we've already done this by customizing the font. So I want to change the color here. So we already created a few weeks ago, we created our own style sheet. And we changed the H1 color to kind of this navy blue. So maybe I want my nav bar to use that same color. So what I'll also do beside my H1, I'll create my own class. I'll give it an ID of BG custom. And then I'll assign this ID to our nav bar. So that'll change the nav bar from using the default black color to using this custom color that I've picked. So in my header, in my nav tag, it's got this class of BG dark. That just comes from the Bootstrap template. I'm going to replace that with my BG custom instead. This should change that background color from black, that navy that I put in my style sheet. Okay, not exactly. We might need to adjust that a little bit. Oops, okay. I don't want to do it there. Sorry. That's the front, the X color. I'll define it here. I'll use the same color as my background color. It usually takes me 2 or 3 tries whenever I do anything with CSS to get it right. That's how I roll. So now I can customize the other thing that we'll want to do is these links. I think Jillian mentioned it earlier. Register, login, and log out. We don't typically find those in the middle of the nav bar, right? The links that have to do with user authentication, we typically would find over on the right. So let's move these over. And then what else should we do with these links? There's one other thing we should do besides write justify them. Do you typically see both log in and log out at the same time? Right, so these should only show up when we're not logged in, and we shouldn't see log out until we log in. So what we'll do, first of all, is we're going to move these links into so right now we've got one UL, so the navbar template, it's got this one UL. We want to create a separate list and write justify it. So I'm going to create a second unordered list. We'll give it the navbar nav. But I'm also going to use this class, ML auto, that will write justify this list. I'm going to move these 3 links inside it. So this is my main navigation with my home and artist link. And then we have the 3 separate links. We want to push those over to the right side of the nav bar. just see how that works. So now these jump over here. So we had the one list and all the links were in the one unordered list. I've now created a separate unordered list that's right justified. We now want some logic around these links. Users should never be able to see all three of these links at one time. Either they see register and log in, or they see log out, but they don't see them all together. So what could we do in this section? We're going to need some kind of if statement. So I'll open a set of PHP tags. If something and then we're going to have an else. Else. So what can we check? What condition is going to tell us which set of links which links we should show? How do we know when to show register and log in and when to show log out? Yep. Okay, so we've already done this, in fact, on the list page, right? We're already checking, we call session start, and we're checking for a user ID in the session. So if we have a user ID in the session, which links do we show? Register and log in, or do we show log out? Yeah, we'll show log out when we do have something in the session. If we don't, we'll show register and log in instead. So the first thing we need to do is call session start. We're going to access current session to check if user is authenticated. So we'll say if our session variable called user ID isn't empty, so in this case, we want to show the logout link. I'm going to cut that. So show logout if we have a valid user ID. Otherwise, we want to display these links instead. And you can break it on multiple lines. You can format this however you want. Doesn't matter. So now the user's either going to get a logout link or they're going to get register and log in, but they won't get all three at the same time. We'll give this a try. Okay. So now when I reload my home page, logout disappears. When I go to my artist list, okay, we'll have to deal with this. Session has already been started. So now we've called session start twice, which the PHP interpreter doesn't like. So we'll have to deal with that. When I log in, so now that I'm logged in, my register and login links disappear, logout reappears. So we'll need to deal with this. This warning says you can't call session start more than once. You can only call it once. So we're trying to call it on this page in two different places. Our header is calling session start, so we know which links to show and which ones to hide. But then our artist list is also calling session start, because we had this code from before, so we know which links to show or hide in here. So which one of these two should we get rid of? If we can't call session start twice, where does it make more sense, and which one's going to happen first? Does it happen first in the header or in the artist list page? Yeah, the header is listed first, so this code here is going to run first. So in the artist list, I'm getting the warning on line 8. It says this has already been started. So we can just get rid of the session start on line 8 of our artist list page. We no longer need it because session start gets called above in the header. So I'll leave it here, but I'll make a note. Session start now called in the header above and can only be called once. I'll leave it here so that we know that it was here, and we've got this note for future reference about how we can only make sure that session start gets invoked one time per page request. So now that error is gone. And if I browse the site as an anonymous user in Chrome, oh, Chrome is caching my CSS, which it's notorious for. To check this in Chrome, you may not be seeing some of these changes. So when I go to an incognito window, it doesn't cache. So now I can go to any page as an anonymous user. My navbar never changes. Right? I'm anonymous all the way through. There's one other last thing we can add. Actually, there's a couple other things we should add to make our navbar complete. It's functional like this, but most applications, like for example, D2L, right? It actually shows who the user is, typically in the top right. So we could maybe also show the user's username up here. And then the one other thing we'll want to do with it to make it fully functional. So the formatting is good. So here I am at mobile scale, right? We use that collapsible navbar class, so my menu shrinks. The problem is when I click it, nothing happens. We don't actually see the link that's inside the navbar. Anybody have an idea why that isn't working? Notice you don't see the artists and log out links. But you want to take a wild guess why that menu doesn't work? Yeah, it requires Bootstrap has some JavaScript that also uses jQuery, the jQuery library, to make that menu open up and show the links. So in order to make that functional, we'll need to add that stuff. So if we want to show the username on all the pages, we're probably going to want to store their email, their username in a session variable. So at the time they log in, on our validate page, we're storing the user ID in a session variable. Maybe we want to create a second session variable with their username, and then we can print the username in the header, in the navbar on every page. So we've already got on our validate page, we already have the username variable. So I'm just going to add it, add a second session variable. Also store username, second session variable, display in the navbar. So this is on the validate page. Once we've logged a user in successfully, we've already got their username in a variable, so we'll just write this variable to the session object. And we can print this session username in our header as well. We might eventually have other session variables. Right now, our site, we don't really have different types of users and different roles. But if we did, this would be where we could store, once the user logs in, we want to identify what role are they in. So we would know what permissions they have. We could put it in a session variable. And then on every page, we would be able to check what role is our user in, so we would know what are they allowed to do. So we'll add that in validate, and then we can display this session username in our header beside the logout link. So in my header, maybe move that down. And we'll put another item in. I'm just going to put it as a dead link. We're not going to take the time to build a user profile page. If we did, this link would typically, you'd click your username, it would take you to your profile if you wanted to do something like reset your password. So we're going to print that session variable into the navbar. So I've just inserted all of this in front of the logout link we already had. Sorry, I'll shrink it down so we can see. Now I refresh my page. There's actually an error here. It says it doesn't recognize a session variable called username. There's actually nothing wrong with the code. The code's correct. So why did I get this error when I tried to refresh my page and it tried to display this new session variable called username? When is this variable getting created? When I validated the login, but I didn't log in again yet. So I'm going to have to log out and log in again. Now it creates my session variable and my username shows up. So again, I can navigate around. I can go to the home page. I can go to the list page. I can go and add my username, shows up, and we see another error here. So same on artist details. We're already calling session start. We'll have to fix that as well. So when I click on add a new artist or click on an artist name to edit, so again, we'll want to remove session start from the artist page. But my username's now in my header as we want it. So I will want to open up artist.php and again comment out the session start method. Okay. It is above. So what we probably will want to do is move the header to the top. So I've got my header down here on line 42, right above the HTML. I'm actually going to move it. And I'll just paste it in and take out the closing tag. So now the header's at the top, and we don't call session start in this code. The session start is already called in the header. So that should get rid of my error. Yeah, that error on artist details now goes away. So header is the very first thing that happens, and the session start command that we had in here on the very first line, that's gone. So we still want to make our header responsive. We'll need to do that because when on a phone, we tap on the mobile menu, we don't see any menu. It's not visible. We need to deal with the page title, which you mentioned earlier as well, right? My browser tab, which is terrible for search engine optimization, when we navigate the site, it still isn't saying anything. It's not telling us what page we're on. And then we should also want to attach a footer. And then we should be able to move our database connection into a separate file as well. We want to do all these things. So actually, let's deal with the page title. What are we going to do about this? Having our pages just say title. I mean, we could cheat. I could go to the header and we could just hard code in the, on line 5, we could just hard code this in to say COMP1006 music library. That would be better than have it saying title, but it doesn't actually tell us what page we're on, which is poor for search engine optimization. So what could we do so that we actually get a proper descriptive title on each page, even though we have a shared header? Okay, you're kind of on the right track, John. We could do that, yep. So, okay, so John, flesh that out a bit more. So what would that look like? Okay, so yeah, we could. Now, what if we have the one challenge will be the scalability of that potentially. If we have 50 pages, it's going to be a big if statement. But you're on the right track. Well, we definitely want to make this a variable for sure. So what we want to do, we can maybe put in the overall name for the site, but then let's use a variable here. So we can have the name of the site, but we can also print a variable. Now, PHP Storm doesn't like this. It says title's not defined. So let's go to our index page first. What could we do to set that variable on each page? So when the header is loaded, it's going to expect that there's a variable called title that's been given a value. Right. On each page, before we include the header, we can set that title value. And that way that variable is shared between both pages. So on index, I'll set a value for that variable first, and then I'll require the header after. So when the code executes in my header, this variable has already been given a value. So John, this is kind of a similar idea, but this way we'll just set it one page at a time. I mean, ultimately it's the same code you're really talking about, right? Each page we're going to give it the title. So now on my home page, it has the name of our site, but then it also has the title of welcome. It's important we set that variable before we call require once. If we do it in the opposite order, if I do it in this order, where we require the header, then we get the first part, and then we get a message saying undefined variable. So we have to set the value of that variable first before including the header, because the header is trying to read that variable. So the order we do this in is important. We want to set the variable and then include the header. And then that variable is shared between those files. So we would need to do the same thing on any other page where we've required the header. We need to set a page title. So my artist page, I'll set a title of artist details. And same on the list page, register, and login. Let's give a descriptive page title to each one. So on login, and I'll do it on the list page as well as on the register page. And then all my pages should have proper titles. You can give those variables any values you want. You don't have to copy my page titles. But typically they should be descriptive for search engines. This is what this page does. Yeah, it is search engine optimization. Okay. And it's also it's just following best practices around HTML, that every page should have a unique page title that describes in a word or two what that page is. Yeah, as opposed to just hard coding it in the header. You know, we don't need this. Every page could just say COMP1006 music library, but then when a search engine goes to index it, it doesn't know what's the difference between the artist page and the artist list page. Title is supposed to tell you what that page does. So both for search engines as well as just proper sort of HTML semantics. Each page should have a unique title. So now every page has a descriptive page title. If I log out, my login page says login. So for example, if we go here and look at the page title, in this case, they've kind of got the reverse. They have the article as the page title, but then still has the name of the site at the end. So every article will have dash the Globe and Mail at the end of the page title. So we also have one last task with our navbar, which is the responsive functionality. So we're going to need some JavaScript. We don't have to write any. We're just going to have to go and link to several libraries for this. So if we go to the Bootstrap website, we can get the libraries that we need. So the website is getbootstrap.com. So open a tab and jump over here. And we'll just click on this download button. Now we've already been here once before. So on the download page, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to use the content delivery network. We already have, the first link is for the Bootstrap, the minified, the compressed CSS file. We already downloaded this one about a month ago. So we've got that in our project already. This bootstrap.min.css, we created the CSS folder. Now we have a couple of choices. So there are 3 JavaScript files we need. There's the Bootstrap JavaScript. So that actually has the code to open, to open and close our little collapsible menu. But this has a couple of dependencies. It needs jQuery and it needs Popper. So we can either download these files into our project, or we can just add these links directly and use the content delivery network. I'm just going to use the content delivery network. So I don't need this first link to the CSS file. We've already got that one. It's kind of a little bit out of order. We actually need jQuery and Popper first, because the Bootstrap JavaScript requires these two. So I'm going to go down to this section, and I'm just going to click copy. So I'm going to copy the link to the jQuery and Popper files on this CDN. Now I want these to be used throughout the whole site. Eventually I'm going to put them in our footer, but we don't have a footer yet. For now, we'll put them in our header. That way they'll be global. They'll be available to all our pages. So copy, just click this blue copy button. You don't even have to highlight it. Click that copy button. And we'll paste those into the head. So we're getting the minified jQuery and minified Popper files. And then we'll also need to grab the link to Bootstrap's own JavaScript file. It has to go below this because Bootstrap's JavaScript depends on these. So these have to be linked first. So then I'll just grab just this link that I'm highlighting in blue. We don't need the CSS. We've already got that CSS file in our project. So copy this file, that's bootstrap.min.js. And that's going to go after the other scripts. With these JavaScripts enabled, our mobile responsive menu should be functional. So if I refresh now, now my little menu, when I click it once, it opens. Click it again, it hides. All the links are still functional. So when I'm logged in, I get my username and log out. But that menu will not work without those 3 JavaScripts. So anytime you're going to use Bootstrap for a responsive menu, you will need the JavaScript in order to make it function. You don't have to change it though. Just link to the CDNs and you're done. Pretty easy. Now, this isn't probably the ideal place for these. I'd rather create a footer and move the JavaScript down to the bottom. So we can create a footer here as well. So I'm going to make a new PHP file called footer. So we want a common footer, like with a copyright statement. We want it to go at the bottom, be embedded at the bottom of all our pages. And we also want to make it, we want to anchor it to the bottom of the page. So no matter how much content is on the page, the footer appears at the very bottom of the screen. So if we have a really short page, like our home page, I don't want the footer bar here, right underneath. I want it anchored to the bottom of the window. And if we have a really long scrolling page, the footer still appears below all the content. So I've put a link up. There's another link in lesson 8, just like we grabbed the Bootstrap Navbar. I've got a kind of a footer template we can use. It's this one. It says a responsive sticky Bootstrap footer. So let's open that up. So there's all kinds of good Bootstrap snippets here. So there's a component. I don't want to have to figure out how to write it all myself. I may be able to find it here. This is all open source. So we want a footer that looks something like this. Spans the full width of the page. It's got some text in the middle, and it will be at the bottom of the window, regardless of how much content's on our page. And it gives us, so first of all, here's the HTML. So I'm going to copy all of the HTML here, and then I'm also going to need to copy a few of the CSS classes, and then we can customize it a bit. So I'm going to grab everything here. Copy it. I'm going to delete everything in the footer file, and we'll just paste in this footer. You need our closing HTML tag. Now this body tag, it has a few classes, but our opening body tag, we don't want this in the footer. Right? We want this class, our body tags, in the header. So we're going to take those first 2 lines and we're going to move those out of the footer into the header. I'm going to cut those, and I'm going to replace my body tag. So part of what this is going to do is allow our content to be the full height of the window. So our footer is not floating in the middle of the page if our page content is really short. So I've overwritten the body tag by adding these classes. And then in my footer, I'm going to get rid of all of this. Also, I could leave this as a div tag. I think I'm going to use a main tag instead. It's more descriptive. And this will be end main. So we've added the HTML. We also need to add some of the CSS from the tutorial. And I want to add the link as to where it came from. I'll just grab that URL. And if you click on the CSS, here are the classes that we need. I'm going to ignore the body. That's giving it like a blue background. I just want these classes. We want to set the HTML and body to 100% height. I'm going to copy these tags and paste them into our style sheet. And then we need to adjust it. There's one small bug in one of these classes we'll have to fix. So copy those 3 CSS definitions. The HTML body, the page content, and sticky footer. I'll paste those into my style sheet. And my code editor is going to complain about this flex shrink none. That should actually be 0. So now we'll try this first on the index page. Let's embed the footer at the bottom and get rid of the closing body and closing HTML tags on index.php. We can see how the footer looks. We may need to adjust it a little bit. So I'm going to get rid of those tags down at the bottom. We'll require the footer here. So now I have this kind of dark gray footer anchored at the bottom. So even though my page content is short, the footer shifts to the bottom. It's stuck to that 100% window. So I could make a couple other changes here if I want. And maybe I want to change the color here. I don't want to use that dark gray. So again, I could define my own color in my style sheet and change the class. I guess for our purposes, that's good enough. So I want to add this footer to all our pages. We'll take a break in a second. It's just a copy and paste. And then the one other quick thing I want to do is see what happens if we have a scrollable page. It fits fine in this window, but what if the page is really long? I want to make sure the footer doesn't wind up sitting right here at the bottom of the window over top of our text. That the footer has to be below any text on the page. So I'll just grab my require statement from index. And again, I want to inject it on all our pages. So my artist form, put the footer at the bottom, login, same thing. And notice all our pages, we also have our JavaScript links here. So the JavaScript link should also get moved into the footer. So I'm going to delete any links to our JavaScript. And I want to put these in the footer instead. So not only do we have our own JavaScript, but we also have the three JavaScripts we used for our navbar, jQuery, Popper, and Bootstrap. We want to put those in the footer as well. So I'm going to take these out of my header. So these can go right before our end body. So now all the pages should have the footer. So now our site is getting close to complete in terms of its format. Every page has got our footer, including register and login. I want to add one more test page to check that the footer moves down when we have a lot of content. Make sure these sticky footer classes do what they're supposed to do. We'll do this quickly and we'll take a break. I'm going to make one more file. I'll just call it long page. We'll include our header at the top. Our footer at the bottom. And then I want to go and get a whole bunch of content that I know is going to be taller than the size of my monitor window. So we'll save that. I've put a link on D2L for you to be able to generate content easily. Anybody have an idea where we can generate sample content that we can put in an application so we can see how it fits? Actually, in the Lesson 8 folder, I've given you a link. This is useful. Also really helpful if you're building mobile applications where space is at a real premium. So what happens when we have a lot of text? And that is this link here that says the lorem ipsum generator. So if you open this link, you can choose your language. And this gives you dummy text. So what I want, I'm going to say I want 10 paragraphs of sample text. Defaults to 5. 5 won't be long enough to fill our window. And I click on generate. And here's 10 paragraphs, 797 words. So I'm going to copy all this and throw it into my long page. And I'll maybe make each one its own paragraph. Always a good idea to check what will your pages look like if you have a lot of content. So now all our content, all my content's here. And as we hope, the footer is anchored at the bottom. So it's not set in the window if the page content is longer than our browser window. At mobile scale, I can still scroll all the way down. My footer's anchored at the bottom where it needs to be. So there's no point reinventing the wheel for things like your navigation and your footer. There's lots of open source tools we can leverage to get the functionality we need, and then we just customize the look and feel so that they fit the application and the brand we're working with. So in terms of the design and the functionality with our header footer, our CSS, we're done. We're not going to do any more with this. This is as good as this site's going to look, for better or for worse. And if you were a better designer than I am, you could do much more with it and make it look much better. This will suit our purposes. Okay, we are going to take a break here. When we come back, there are a couple of other things we talked about. We want to reuse some of the code. So we'll do that in 10 minutes. We'll take a pause here.